Just like you mentioned, my name is Lemon Yatu. I'm a doctoral researcher with University of Worcester. And what I will be sharing with you this evening is titled The Impact of Entrepreneurship Education on Shaping the Entrepreneurial Attitude of Students in Emerging Markets. And I'll be looking at the case study of Nigeria. So the context of my research is Nigeria. The webinar will explore the following questions. The contextual nature of doing business in Nigeria. And I'll be looking at that from a stakeholder perspective, from the point of view of entrepreneurs, people who are actual entrepreneurs, and also educators, those who are part of the training and development or human capacity development, which is mostly lecturers or teachers, if you would call it that way. And then, of course, the ease of doing business in Nigeria, how easy it is to do business in Nigeria. And again, the entrepreneurial competencies or attitudes that are essential for surviving and thriving within that very context. And I would equally be looking at the effectiveness of the Nigerian entrepreneurship education in terms of, with regards to developing this attitude. And I will end this session with some challenges and way forward for making the higher education institutions more effective in delivering better outcomes. So that's what I will be covering in this seminar. Again, entrepreneurship, as we all know, it's either a business activity or a way of thinking that involves spotting opportunities, taking advantage of them, creating value, and so on. And again, entrepreneurship globally, it has a wide recognition as a driver of economic development that is widely established, well known. It plays a very significant role in terms of job creation and also stimulating economic activities. And we see that evidence amongst nations around the world. Government policies are being tilted towards entrepreneurial or entrepreneurship agenda. And organizations are increasingly also thinking along those lines. And then not just that one, we also see the spread of adoption or the spread of incorporating entrepreneurship in curriculum in different institutions within the education industry as a whole. So it's very popular. It's an agenda that is all over. So that's a very little background of the research context. But more specifically, research shows that there is so much work done in entrepreneurial agenda in advanced countries, or with regards to developing countries or emerging markets. It's more or less a catch-up that they are doing. So that's one of the reasons why it's an area that is emerging and is worth exploring further. So, justification for my research, why researching or why having interest in entrepreneurship education. Again, like I mentioned, there's a wide recognition of entrepreneurship as an engine room or a stimulant for economic activities. And if we see what is happening in a lot of developing countries, there's a very high incidence of unemployment, poverty. It's at its peak in many of these countries. and Nigeria as a case in point. And Nigeria having a very large youthful population, again, with so much unemployment, it makes entrepreneurship a very viable tool for ameliorating or reducing such incidents. So that's one of the justifications or one of the reasons why I have a specific interest, why the research is focused on that very area. And again, the research builds on existing work, which of course there are very few that explore the impact of entrepreneurship education on the entrepreneurial intention of students within that very context. So Nigeria is an emerging market in Sub-Saharan Africa with a very large population, almost 195 million. The GDP stands at about 39.7 billion. Whilst there is a significant progress made in terms of socio-economic development, the Human Capital Index from World Bank reports that it's still very weak in terms of investment in human capital development. So there is increasingly a shift in looking at entrepreneurship as the way forward, as an agenda or a policy initiative to reduce some of the incidents or some of the potential problems within the economy. And we've seen a lot of government initiatives around entrepreneurship since from 2008, to be more precise, right up till this very moment. But the question is, how effective has all these initiatives been? That's the fundamental question that research is asking, and my own thesis is also questioning. If the government has been investing and also exploring the path of entrepreneurship since 2008, it's almost 12 years now. How effective has that been? So looking at entrepreneurship education in Nigeria, how is it? What's the current state of research? How does it look? What is it about? Is it delivering the expected results, the expected outcomes? Current research shows that entrepreneurship education is relatively very theoretical and less practical within the Nigerian context. What is happening in a lot of the higher education institutions in the name of entrepreneurship education is not exactly what will eventually give the required outcome. So if you look at the content of the curriculum, is very theoretical, it's not very practical. Equally, literature reveals depth of research on the behavioral or cognitive approach. So what the universities are doing, most of the initiatives, they tend to focus on aspects that will not exactly result to outcomes that eventually entrepreneurial graduates would emerge from. And there is significant increase in literature and debate supporting entrepreneurship education at all levels. The emphasis tends to be more at the university level. And I'm wondering if it's late to start immersing someone into entrepreneurship at university level. Should it be at a primary school or secondary school level? That again is another debate. So my research specifically looks at, like I mentioned, the perception of entrepreneurs and also entrepreneurship education in Nigeria with regards to doing business, and also with regards to how effective is the Nigerian higher education institution in delivering the required or the expected outcome. So I'll just quickly talk you through the methodology that I have adopted in my research. So it's basically a two-phase approach where I carried out a qualitative and a quantitative research. So the first phase involved interviewing entrepreneurs, which the research captured them as part of the stakeholders. So entrepreneurs were interviewed, and also educators were interviewed. And the second phase was a survey among students. And that survey was carried out using questionnaire that was operationalized based on the outcome of the interview with the stakeholders. So with regards to doing business in Nigeria, from the outcome of the research, it suggests that Nigeria is indeed a very tough place to run your business. It's a very difficult environment, even though entrepreneurs would always say that in the midst of difficulties, in the midst of challenges are opportunities, which is very true. But then the fact needs to also be established that the nature of the Nigerian context, it's quite a very challenging one. And the issue of Nigeria being a very monocultural economy, depending so much on oil, makes it a very challenging environment, because the government, the perspective and also the attention of the government is more towards that very sector that generates the most of the wealth, as against looking at the small and medium-sized enterprises, which in many economies, we see that it contributes a very large part of activities within those economies. So despite the human and material resources alongside the government policies and efforts in promoting entrepreneurship, again, like I said, it's still very tough. Surviving as entrepreneur would require you you would have to have a bit of extra, whichever kind of attributes or attitudes are obtainable in other contexts. Within the Nigerian context, you would have to be you would have to be more resilient, more persistent. The attitude would have to be at a different level. This is an example of one of the quotes from an interview, the interview I conducted. Any individual or business that is not self-driven and motivated cannot survive in Nigeria, because the system does not encourage entrepreneurs. So this is a quote from one of the entrepreneurs. These are people who they are hands-on within that very system, within that context, and the general perception is that the attitude of the government towards entrepreneurship, whilst it has significantly changed, is still such that they still find limitations. We have this one, ease of doing business. It's a World Bank report that captures how easy it is doing business. So Nigeria is about 131. So we could see out of 180, even though the number has improved over the years, but again, it's still still far behind, 131. So with regards to ease of doing business, things have changed, but there's still a lot to be done. Most specifically, infrastructural issues around electricity, transportation, networking, in terms of moving of goods from one place to the other. It's potentially a very big challenge still in Nigeria. So the question, one of the questions that my research was trying to answer, or seeks to find answer to, is are there attributes or competencies that are essential for the context Nigeria? And the research found 5 key main themes that are specifically essential for the Nigerian context. That's from the stakeholders, the entrepreneurs, and also the educators. They suggested 5. But importantly, one thing to note also is, whilst the research identified specific attitudes required for doing business in Nigeria, one finding from the research is the mismatch between the view of the entrepreneurs and also the entrepreneurship educators. There was a kind of dichotomy between their views. The entrepreneurs are more for attitudes and attributes that are very practical. The educators, on the other hand, tend to be more theoretical in their suggestions, more bookish, if there's any word like that. So that's one of the key findings from the research with regards to the essential entrepreneurial attitudes for the Nigerian context. But more specifically, 5 of them. The first one is risk-taking, persistence, proactiveness, networking, and self-efficacy. They were at the top of the attitudes that came out from the interview. So the suggestion is that if you want to run a business in Nigeria, or you're running a business in Nigeria, these are some key attitudes that are worth paying attention to. And of course, for educators as well, or people developing curriculum, it's quite informative that when entrepreneurship programs are being designed, these are some attitudes that could be incorporated into the design of the program. Again, I got some few excerpts from the interview. This one says, a lazy person cannot do business in Nigeria. You will have to be rugged, in other words, up and doing, to be able to survive the tough and harsh entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. And here's another one. Doing business in Nigeria is not like a buffet where you will just go into it and eat. Patience and persistence are required. And then the final one says, as an entrepreneur in Nigeria, I found street wisdom, or being street smart, a crucial attribute that has added great value to my entrepreneurial journey. So again, these are stakeholders airing their views or making submissions as to some of the attributes or attitudes that are required for doing business in Nigeria. The fundamental question now is the Nigerian higher education institutions, how well positioned are they in developing or shaping some of these attributes or attitudes among students? how effective is the entrepreneurship education in developing some of these attributes that have been suggested to be important. When we look at the Nigerian tertiary education, again, the views of the stakeholders is such that there is so much disbelief in what the entrepreneurship education can offer. They don't believe in the system. They don't believe in the provision as something worthwhile. So if you look at the context of the Nigerian tertiary education, there are about 308 degree awarding institutions, with 134 of them in polytechnics, 174 universities. And every year, importantly, they are graduating or chunking out graduates in thousands. The figure here is 600,000, which I believe is even more, both the private and the public institutions. And the question is, are there sufficient industries or employment for these graduates? The answer is always no. The graduate manufacturing factories, they continue to expand while the graduate employing factories continue to shrink. It's a lamentation of someone, which again is real. The human capital being a key driver of sustainable and inclusive economic growth. But then if you look at the investment that the government is allocating to education is very limited. The budget for 2020 suggests 6.7%. If you look at that relatively or comparatively, it's quite low. So that's one of the interesting dynamics, which of course is a challenge for the system. So in terms of the effectiveness of entrepreneurship education in Nigeria, how effective is the entrepreneurship education in producing graduates with the requisite attitude, entrepreneurial attitude for entrepreneurial activities? How effective is it? Again, our research suggests that they are not really doing much. If you look at the input and the output, there is more or less a mismatch. Again, the debate is highly contested. Some people are suggesting that the entrepreneurship education is indeed doing significantly well in terms of developing graduates with the requisite attitude. But then there are other studies that suggest otherwise. And our research, my research, the central thesis of my research equally suggests that whilst there's a level of improvement, it hasn't really reflected much on the outcome of the students. And with the interview that I conducted with the entrepreneurs, a lot of them don't have confidence in the viability of entrepreneurship education, like I mentioned earlier. One of the entrepreneurs suggested that the Nigerian entrepreneurship education does very little in developing the identified entrepreneurial attitude required. And here's another one: the curriculum emphasizes less of the practical and experiential approach, but more of theoretical approach. And the last one is quite informing. It says the system and the provision is actually letting people think, is not actually allowing people to think. And it says that you can't groom successful entrepreneurs in a thou shall not kind of condition. Entrepreneurship education should actively promote and encourage free thinking. So that's the view of one of the entrepreneurs. So the suggestion is that what is currently available is not sufficient in producing graduates who are ready to go out of university, and instead of searching for jobs, they are creating jobs for themselves. And the second phase of the research, which was a survey with students, what I did in the research was to test the difference between first year and final year students to see if there's any difference in their entrepreneurial intention. Entrepreneurial attitude. And again, the research finding did not show much significant difference in the two. And what that means is that either the provision is not effective enough, or there are other intervening variables. And that shows that, again, there's need for a lot to be done in terms of improving the effectiveness of the Nigerian entrepreneurship education. And of course, there are a lot of challenges that were identified as well, which is commonplace within the Nigerian context. There are a lot of government policies, but then if you look at the implementation and also the monitoring process of these policies, it's a big challenge. It poses a very big challenge. The government will come up with a vibrant policy, interesting entrepreneurship initiative, but the way it's been implemented, the way it's been monitored, doesn't really give much room for it to achieve its objective. One of the initiatives is Youth Enterprise with Innovation in Nigeria, UE. It was one of the entrepreneurship initiatives. And one of the critiques also to that very initiative, as indeed other initiatives, is the fact that the beneficiaries who were recruited or who benefited from the program, the selection process was characterized with a lot of nepotism, favoritism, which of course at the end of the day it compromises the central objective of what it's set out to do. Again, if you look at the entrepreneurial intention of Nigeria as a country, it's very high, but then it's not exactly translating into action, which again is a challenge. And then it goes back to some of the systemic problems that are typical characteristics of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I've made some few suggestions. Delivery of entrepreneurship education needs to be better understood in Nigeria. The research suggests that there is a bit of gap in terms of understanding what exactly needs to be taught, how it should be taught in the institution. So there's need for a better understanding of that. And there's equally a need for the provision to be tailored towards a specific context. The entrepreneurship program should be tailored towards the context of Nigeria. That would allow room for more results. And in terms of course, course content, the development of the course content, it's my considered opinion, one of the suggestions in my research, that there should be involvement of stakeholders in curriculum development, in the process of the entrepreneurship education program. There's a very big gap or institutional void in the Nigerian context, where some of the entrepreneurs interviewed suggested that even if they want to contribute to what the universities are doing, some of them don't have the open access to do it. So again, if Nigerian entrepreneurship education would develop and be effective in developing graduates, in shaping their attitude, there's need for partnership, there's need for involvement of stakeholders in the process. And of course, to continue to work on the designing of government policies that are tailored towards encouraging entrepreneurial activities and also entrepreneurs. So again, in conclusion, like I said, entrepreneurship education is the vehicle through which entrepreneurship would be well established, be promoted, and also encouraged, especially among young people, because they constitute a very large percentage of the population in Nigeria, for example. So when the government, the institutions involve them and create an atmosphere, an environment that makes it enabling, it will go a long way. I made some few research suggestions here. Widely acknowledged involvement of multiple stakeholders, like I said, not just educators, but also people within industry, entrepreneurs, people who are doing it in real life. If they're involved in the education process, then it makes it a blend of both theory and practice. And of course, the study focused on impact of entrepreneurship education on students in higher education. There is equally need for the research to be expanded to look at the intervention at other levels of education. Could be secondary, primary level, not just university level. And it will be a significant contribution to the body of knowledge to explore the impact of entrepreneurship at secondary level and also at primary level, like I mentioned. So that's it about the research on entrepreneurship education in Nigeria, the ease of doing business in Nigeria. I'm happy to answer questions and also welcome your contributions if there's any. Thank you for listening.